The morning I found the business card, I was standing in my dead mother's kitchen at 2 in the morning holding a recipe book like it was evidence. And I suppose it was. Let me back up. My mother called me every Sunday at 11 a.m. For years. Not once did she miss it. I could be in the middle of a practical exam, elbow deep in a sauce reduction, and my phone would buzz on the counter with her name, and I would hand my spoon to whoever was nearest and step into the hallway. Every Sunday. 48 weeks a year. The other 4 she called on Saturday instead, because she said Sunday was for resting, and she refused to make even love into a routine without exceptions. This past Sunday, she didn't call. I waited until noon. I told myself she was busy. I told myself the bakery had an early order, or the hot water heater had gone out again, or she'd fallen asleep in the porch chair the way she sometimes did on slow mornings, with a cup of tea going cold in her hand. I told myself all of it. At 12:04, I called her. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. Her voice on the recording, warm, a little brisk, all business, said she'd call back soon as she got a free hand. I left a message. I went back to my apartment. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the Atlanta traffic below and felt something I could not name sitting in the center of my chest. My Aunt Berenice called at 12:17. I want you to hear me say this clearly. I drove 6 hours without stopping. I did not turn on music. I did not stop for gas until the warning light had been on for 40 miles. I just drove, and the highway unspooled in front of me in the dark, and I did not cry, because crying requires a kind of acceptance I wasn't ready to perform yet. Before I left, I did one thing. I opened my phone and looked at the last thing my mother had sent me. It came 3 days earlier, on a Thursday evening. No text with it, just a photo. Her recipe book. The green one with the cracked spine she'd had since before I was born, the one with Adwoa's book written in the inside cover in a teenager's careful handwriting. It was open to the cardamom cake page. That was it. No caption, no explanation, just the photo, at 7:43 p.m. on a Thursday. I remember thinking, she's being sentimental, which wasn't like her. My mother was never just being sentimental. I know that now. Sable Creek does grief the way it does everything else, loudly, collectively, and with an enormous amount of food. By the time I pulled into the driveway at 7:30 in the morning, there were already 2 casserole dishes on the front steps and a neighbor I vaguely recognized from childhood, tying a wreath of white flowers to the mailbox post. She turned when she heard my car. She gave me the look, the soft, careful, tilted head look that I would receive approximately 200 more times over the next 4 days and never once stop flinching at. I sat in the car for a moment. The bakery was 3 blocks away. Adwoa's Bakery, Mercer Street, 40 years on the same corner, same brick face, same hand-lettered sign my grandmother had painted in 1984. My mother had worked every one of those 40 years, first beside her own mother, and then after her mother passed, alone. She'd paid off the building 12 years ago, she'd expanded the kitchen 8 years ago, she added the second storefront window 6 years ago, so she said the morning light could get in properly. The bakery was closed, first time in 11 years. I looked at the dark windows and I breathed. Then I got out of the car and went inside to begin the work of losing her. Dominic was at the door, my mother's husband. 58 years old, silver at the temples, a face arranged into the appropriate expression of a man receiving condolences. He was good at faces. He extended his hand and I shook it, and for one beat, 1/2 second, I felt the grip hold just a little longer than it needed to. Caleb. He said my name like a period. Final. Factual. Here. Dominic. He stepped back to let me in, and I saw them immediately, because that is the kind of thing I notice. Priya and Marcus, Dominic's children from his first marriage, already settled into the living room with the ease of people who had arrived before the host. Priya was on the couch with a notepad on her knee, a notepad at a time like this, and Marcus was by the kitchen doorway holding a coffee mug that I was fairly certain was from my mother's cabinet. They had arrived the day before me. Adwoa Osei's only child, and I arrived the day after her husband's children. I registered this. I said nothing. I put my bag down, I accepted coffee, I let the neighbors come and go and said the right things in the right order, and the morning moved the way mornings move when grief is sitting in the room, making everything slow and strange and slightly off-key. The funeral was on a Wednesday. Gray sky. The kind of overcast that isn't dramatic, just flat and pale and indifferent, which is somehow worse. The church smelled like the specific combination of old wood and fresh flowers that I will now always associate with loss. The choir sang a hymn my mother had hummed while she worked, a low, unhurried sound she'd make while shaping loaves or checking the proof on a batch of dough, not even aware she was doing it. I sat in the first pew. Dominic sat beside me, Priya and Marcus beside him. In the third row, I could see Miss Cora Washington, my mother's oldest friend and the woman who had worked morning shifts at the bakery since before I was born. Miss Cora was 73 and had the kind of stillness that some people mistake for age and other people recognize as wisdom. She was not crying, she was watching. There is a difference, and Miss Cora had always understood it. At the reception, I slipped out of the living room and walked 3 blocks to the bakery. The back key was where it had always been, under the third pot of the herb garden my mother kept by the rear door, the one with the rosemary she used in the focaccia. I let myself in. The kitchen was dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I stood in the center of the room and breathed it in. Brown sugar, cardamom, the faint, warm, yeasty exhale of a room that had been full of bread every morning for 40 years. My mother's apron hung on the hook by the walk-in, her handwriting on the chalkboard specials from 3 days ago, cardamom honey cake, rosemary sea salt focaccia, brown butter shortbread, was still there, white chalk on black, as clean and deliberate as everything she did. I didn't touch anything, I just stood there and counted. The 2 industrial mixers, the 6 proofing drawers, the walk-in refrigerator she had saved 2 years to buy and cried the day it was installed, actual tears which I had never seen before or since. The shelves of sheet pans, lined up with the precise spacing she'd trained into everyone who ever worked here, everything at regulation distance, nothing crowding anything else. On the refrigerator door, held by a magnet shaped like a small cast-iron skillet, was a sticky note. I crossed the room and read it. "Caleb, don't forget to bleed the radiator before November. It sticks on the left valve first. M." She had written it expecting to remind me in person. She had written it because she knew I would be the one coming here eventually. She had written it in the present tense, for a future that included her. I stood there for a long time. Then I put the note in my pocket and went back to the reception.
Here is what I want to ask you before I go further. Have you ever walked into a room and known, not suspected, not wondered, known, that a conversation had just changed shape around you? That people had just become a slightly different version of themselves the moment you entered? Tell me in the comments, because that evening at the reception, that is exactly what happened. I came in through the back door to get a glass of water. Priya and Marcus were in the hallway, voices low and close the way voices get when they're not meant to carry. I heard it in fragments, the way you hear things not meant for you. The property assessment came back higher than he expected. Dominic says once probate opens, it should be straightforward. Caleb's not on anything, is he, like legally? That last sentence, the word legally, at my mother's funeral, 4 hours after her funeral, Priya saw me in the doorway. The conversation stopped, and here is what she did. Here is the part I have thought about many times since. She smiled. Not a caught smile, a warm one, practiced, completely unrattled. "Caleb, can I get you anything? You must be exhausted. This is so much to carry alone." Weaponized concern. It is one of the most effective tools available to people who have something to protect and need you not to notice. I smiled back. "I'm okay. Thank you, Priya." I got my water. I went back to the living room. I sat down next to a neighbor I had known since childhood and talked about the weather and said nothing at all. That evening, after the neighbors had gone and the casserole dishes had been wrapped and stacked in the refrigerator, Dominic asked me to sit down. He had folders. I want you to understand what that means. The day of my mother's funeral, before the reception chairs were even folded and returned to the church, the man had folders. He spoke the way he always spoke, measured, reasonable, the particular cadence of someone who has decided that sounding calm is the same as being right. He talked about the bakery's finances, cash flow, the cost of maintaining the building, property taxes on commercial real estate in a town where development was quietly, steadily increasing. Then he slid a piece of paper across the table. A number. A significant number. I've been in preliminary talks with a development group, Pinnacle Properties. They're acquiring the Mercer Street block. The offer is... He paused, giving the number room to breathe. More than fair. As the estate executor, I'll be managing the process, but I want this to be a family conversation, Caleb. Your voice matters here. Your voice matters here. I looked at the number. I looked at Dominic. I thought about the apron on the hook and the sticky note in my pocket, and the photo my mother had sent me on Thursday evening with no caption. I thought she was never just being sentimental. I'll need some time to think, I said. Dominic nodded with the patience of a man who has already thought for both of you. Of course, take a few days. I went upstairs. I did not sleep.
At 6 a.m., I gave up on sleeping and went to the bakery. Miss Cora was already there. Of course she was. She had been opening that kitchen before sunrise for 30 years, and grief, apparently, was not sufficient reason to break the habit. She didn't ask how I was. She handed me a dish towel and pointed at the stack of mixing bowls that needed drying, and for 20 minutes we worked in the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. Then she spoke, without looking up from the counter she was wiping. Your mama came in early the last few months, earlier than usual, before even me some mornings. I asked her once. I said, Adwoa, what are you doing here before sunrise? And she looked at me and smiled that particular smile of hers and said she was making sure the recipe book was in order. She folded the cloth, set it on the counter. She was particular about that book. She didn't say anything else. She picked up her coffee cup and walked into the front of the shop, and I stood in the kitchen holding a mixing bowl and feeling the sentence rearrange something in my chest. I drove back to the house. I went straight to the kitchen. The recipe book was on the counter. The green one, the cracked spine, the same book from the photo. I don't know how long I stood there before I touched it. Then I picked it up, opened it to the cardamom cake page, page 47, the page worn softest from years of handling, and I found it, taped to the back of the page, carefully, with the precise edges of a woman who did nothing carelessly, an e-book reader. Graves and Fletcher, Law Office, Estate Planning and Trust Administration, and below the printed name, in my mother's handwriting, in blue ink, in the unhurried script she used when she was writing something she wanted to last. Call her first, baby, before anyone else. M. I held the card for a long time. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor, put my back against the cabinet, and finally, I let myself cry. Not for long. My mother didn't raise a man who sits on kitchen floors, but for that moment, in the early morning quiet of a house that still smelled like her, I let it happen. Then I got up, I washed my face, I put the business card in my wallet, and I started paying attention. I called Eleanor Graves from the bakery parking lot at 6:52 in the morning, sitting in my car with the engine off and the windows fogging at the edges from the cold. She picked up on the second ring. Caleb. Not a question, like she had been waiting for my name to appear on her phone and had decided not to be surprised when it did. How soon can you come in? Today, I said. Now, if you'll have me. I'll have you, she said. Come to the office. I'll be there in 30 minutes. I drove downtown. I parked on Fletcher Street. I sat outside for a moment and looked at the sign above the door, Graves and Fletcher, attorneys at law, and thought about the fact that my mother had sent me to this address from beyond her own death, with a handwritten note hidden inside a recipe book on the page for cardamom cake. She was never just being sentimental. I went inside. Eleanor Graves was in her early 60s, silver-haired with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the kind of organized stillness that comes from decades of holding other people's most complicated truths. Her office was small and precise, wood paneling, a desk without a single unnecessary item on it, 2 chairs across from her. She gestured to one, and I sat, and she opened a leather folder and looked at me directly, the way people do when they had decided not to soften something. "Your mother hired me 6 years ago," she said. "She came to me on a Thursday morning in March, alone, and she sat in that chair, and she said, 'Eleanor, I need to make sure my son cannot be robbed of what I'm leaving him. I need you to make it impossible.' Those were her exact words. Impossible." I said nothing. Eleanor continued. "Your mother established an irrevocable living trust. She named it the Osei Family Trust. Into that trust, she transferred 3 things: the bakery building on Mercer Street, the commercial equipment inside it, and a savings account she had been building for 11 years. She slid a document across the desk. Total asset value at the time of filing, approximately $890,000. The room tilted slightly. Not physically, just the particular dizziness that comes when a number that large arranges itself in front of you for the first time. "All of it," Eleanor said, "is held in the trust. You are the sole beneficiary and successor trustee. The moment you formally accept that role, every decision about these assets runs through you." I looked at the document, my mother's name at the top, the date of filing, 6 years ago. She had sat in this chair, in this office, when I was 16 years old and 300 miles away at a school I was already planning to leave, and she had done this. "The bakery building," Eleanor continued, "was transferred out of your mother's personal name at the time of filing, which means it never entered her personal estate. It cannot go through probate. Dominic Osei, as the estate executor, has no claim on it. He cannot sell it, transfer it, or negotiate on its behalf. It was never his to touch." The words settled over the room like something final. I stared at the document. I found my mother's signature at the bottom, her name in full, the same signature I had seen on birthday cards and permission slips and the lease agreement for my first Atlanta apartment, the one she'd co-signed without hesitation and without asking what my backup plan was. I found the date, 6 years ago. She had known 6 years ago what Dominic would become when money entered the room. She had loved him and married him, and she had known. And she had planned anyway. "Why didn't she tell me?" I asked. Eleanor removed her glasses, set them on the desk. "Your mother said, and these are her words, Caleb, I don't want him carrying the weight of this before he needs to. He'll know what to do when the time comes. He just needs the tools." The room was very quiet. "She also said," Eleanor continued carefully, "that she didn't want you to spend your 20s watching your back. She wanted you to spend them learning your craft." I pressed my thumb against the edge of the document, felt the paper, real, solid, my mother's signature in ink that had been drying for 6 years. I had to ask the next question, even though part of me already knew the shape of the answer. "Eleanor, how long has Dominic been talking to Pinnacle Properties?" She looked at me for a moment. Then she opened a second section of her folder. "I became aware," she said, "through a title inquiry filed at the county clerk's office, that someone was searching the ownership record on the bakery building 4 months ago." She paused. "The inquiry was associated with an account linked to Pinnacle Properties Development, LLC. 4 months ago. My mother had been alive 4 months ago. "There's more," Eleanor said, "and I need you to hear this steadily." I nodded. "Dominic filed to open probate on your mother's estate yesterday morning. He submitted an inventory of personal estate assets." She slid another document across the desk. "The bakery building is listed on page 2. He's claiming it as a marital asset to be distributed through the estate." I looked at the page, line 7, the Mercer Street property, my mother's bakery, listed under estate assets, as though it were a piece of furniture they'd bought together at a weekend market. He doesn't know about the trust, I said. Either that, Eleanor said, or he's gambling that you don't.
I sat in my car afterward for a long time. I did not start the engine. I put both hands on the wheel and I looked at the windshield, and I thought about my mother at 5 in the morning in that kitchen, shaping dough in the dark before anyone else was awake, in a building she owned outright, in a building she had already secured in a trust that no one could see or touch. I thought about the way Dominic had said, "Your voice matters here," the previous evening, with his folders already open on the table. I thought about Priya's notepad at the reception. I thought about Marcus with his coffee mug from my mother's cabinet, standing at the kitchen doorway, with the ease of someone who had already decided the room was partly his. I thought about a sentence my mother used to say when I was learning to cook, when I was impatient, when I wanted the sauce to be done before it was ready. "Caleb, the waiting is not separate from the work. The waiting is the work." She had been waiting 6 years for this moment to arrive. She had set everything in place, and then she had gone back to her kitchen and made bread every morning and smiled at her husband over dinner and said nothing, because she was the most patient person I have ever known, and patience, real patience, the kind that doesn't fidget, the kind that doesn't need to be seen, was her deepest form of power. I thought about all of it, and then I thought about one more thing. I thought about the sticky note on the refrigerator, "Don't forget to bleed the radiator before November." She wrote that note for me to find. She knew I would be the one coming here to check on things. She knew I would be the one with the back key and the knowledge of which herb pot it lived under. She knew all of this because I was the one who had always come, not because I was obligated to, but because I wanted to, because the bakery was mine in the way that only things you love without being told to can be yours. My mother didn't just love me, she paid attention to me, and she built the trust around what she saw. I started the engine. I drove back to the house, and I was calm the way water is calm just before it decides to move. Have you ever had to sit at a table and listen to someone explain to you in a reasonable voice how they intend to take something that belongs to you, while smiling, while offering you a smaller version of it as though the offer itself is a kindness? If you have, tell me in the comments. Because that night at dinner, I watched Dominic pass the breadbasket with the warmth of a man who had done nothing wrong, and I understood completely and finally what my mother had been protecting me from. Not just the building, the version of family that shows up when there's money on the table and decides quietly that your share of things was always a little smaller than theirs. Over rosemary chicken and green beans in the house my mother had kept for 20 years, Dominic laid it out. His voice was warm. His hands were open on the table, palms up, a posture I had read somewhere that people use when they want to signal they are withholding nothing. "I've been thinking about the timeline," he said, looking at me. "Given everything, I think the responsible thing is to move on the Pinnacle offer sooner rather than later. The development group is ready to proceed. The estate process can run concurrently." He paused. "I just need you to sign off on the bakery being included in the estate inventory, Caleb. Just clears the paperwork for the transfer. A formality." I took a slow sip of water, set the glass down. "I'll think about it," I said. Priya looked up from her plate. "It would really help to have it settled, Caleb, for all of us." Marcus nodded without looking up. He was performing the agreement of a man who has already decided and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. "I understand. I'll think about it." Dominic smiled. The warmth stayed perfectly in place. "Of course, take your time." Take your time from the man who had filed probate papers the morning after my mother's funeral. I was washing the dinner dishes when my phone buzzed on the counter. "Miss Cora?" I dried my hands and stepped into the hallway.
Her voice was low, stripped of the warm, unhurried texture it usually carried. This was a different Miss Cora, the one underneath the warmth, the one who had watched my mother build something for 40 years and had no intention of watching anyone take it apart. "Baby, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without making any noise about it." "I'm listening." "Marcus came into the bakery this afternoon, while you were out. He had his phone out and he was taking pictures. The kitchen layout, the equipment, the walk-in. I came out of the back and asked him what he was doing, and he said..." She paused, and I could hear her choosing her words with the precision of someone who knows that accuracy matters. "He said he was just curious, said he'd always wondered what the back of the place looked like." I leaned against the wall. "Real estate people aren't curious, Caleb," Miss Cora said. "They're measuring." I closed my eyes for a moment, opened them. "Thank you, Cora. Your mother told me once that the bakery would be yours someday. She said it the way she said things she had already made arrangements for." A pause. "Whatever arrangements she made, I hope you know what they are." "I'm finding out," I said. "Good," she said, and then she was gone. I went upstairs. I closed the door. I called Eleanor Graves at 9 in the evening, and she answered on the first ring. "What do I need to do?" I said. "Tell me exactly." I heard her breathe in. Then she spoke with the calm clarity of a woman who had been ready for this call. "You need to formally accept your role as successor trustee. I have the acceptance document ready. I've had it ready since the day I heard from Bernice that Adwoa had passed. You sign it. I file a lis pendens at the county clerk's office first thing tomorrow morning before Dominic's probate proceeding can gain any traction on the bakery as an estate asset. Once the lis pendens is on public record, any conflicting claim gets flagged. Dominic's probate inventory listing is rejected on that asset. And if he moves before 8 a.m., then whatever he files will conflict with a trust recorded 6 years ago. The clerk will kick it back. The chain of title is clean, Caleb. Your mother made sure of that. There is no version of this where the trust loses, provided we move first." I sat on the edge of the bed. My mother's house was quiet around me. I could hear the refrigerator humming 3 rooms away. "She planned all of this," I said. "Not a question." "She planned all of this," Eleanor confirmed. "I have seen a great many trusts in my career. I have never seen one assembled with such..." She paused, searching for the word. "Affection. Every clause, every contingency. She thought about you in every line." I looked at the wall across from me. There was a photo there from when I was maybe 9 years old. My mother and me outside the bakery, both in aprons, both dusted with flour, both laughing at something outside the frame. Someone must have taken it. I had never thought to ask who. She said something to me the day she finalized the trust. She said, "Eleanor, my son will know this place is worth keeping before he ever asks what it's worth. The day he asks the price instead of the story, that's when I'll worry, but that day won't come." I pressed the heel of my hand against my sternum. "Send me the document," I said. "It's already in your email, has been since this morning." I opened my laptop. There it was. The acceptance of successor trustee form. 1 page, clean, my mother's name at the top of the trust header, mine below, in the beneficiary line in the trustee succession clause. I read it twice. I read it the way my mother had taught me to read recipes, not scanning, not skimming, but word by word, with full attention, because the difference between a good result and a ruined one is usually in the line you didn't read carefully enough. Then I signed it. My phone buzzed as I was closing the laptop. A text from Priya. "Hey, Dad wants to do a family meeting tomorrow morning at 9 to talk through next steps on the estate. Would love to have us all together for it." The smiley face at the end of that sentence, that particular punctuation choice. I read the text twice. Then I set my phone face down on the nightstand. Eleanor's deadline was 8 a.m. Their meeting was at 9. I had exactly 1 hour between the moment the county clerk opened its doors and the moment Dominic sat down at that table with his folders and his open palms and his reasonable voice. 1 hour. My mother used to say that the recipe isn't just what you put in, it's what you hold back until the right moment, the spice you add at the end, after the heat, so the flavor stays alive. The patience you keep in reserve for the moment when everything depends on it. I had been holding this for days. The moment was tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. I turned off the light. I lay on my back in the dark. I did not sleep for a long time, but eventually, sometime after midnight, sometime before the birds started, I did.
I was up at 4:47 a.m. Not because my alarm went off, because I hadn't really slept. Not the deep, restoring kind. The kind I got was shallow and restless, full of half-dreams that dissolved the moment I reached for them. At some point before 5, I gave up, sat up in the dark, and just listened to the house. It was quiet. The particular quiet of a house where everyone inside it thinks they are the only one awake. I got dressed, I went downstairs, and I did the one thing that felt right before any of it began. I baked. I had the recipe memorized. Page 47, the page warned softest, the page she had sent me in that Thursday evening photo. I found the ingredients without turning on the overhead light because I had watched her make this cake so many times I could have navigated that kitchen blind. Cardamom ground fine. Brown butter pulled off the heat at exactly the right second. Amber, not dark. The line between perfect and ruined is 12 seconds and full attention. Honey, eggs at room temperature, because she always said cold eggs tighten a batter, and a tight batter doesn't breathe. While it baked, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, and I thought about my mother. Not about the trust, not about Dominic or Priya, or the probate filing, or the number on the Pinnacle offer sheet. Just about her. The way she moved through that bakery kitchen like water through a familiar channel. No wasted motion, nothing performed, just the quiet efficiency of a woman who had done something she loved for long enough that the doing and the being had become the same thing. The way she laughed, sudden, fully committed, like laughing was something she'd decided to mean. The way she said my name when she was proud of me, not louder, but slower, like she wanted it to last. The timer went off at 6:11. I pulled the cake from the oven. I let it cool on the rack the way she always insisted. You can't rush the cool, Caleb. A hot cake is an unfinished cake. And while it cooled, I got in my car and drove to the county clerk's office at 7:48 a.m. and parked across the street with the engine off and the heater still running. At 7:54, Eleanor Graves pulled into the parking lot. Gray blazer, leather folder. She moved with the purposeful unhurry of a woman who has been doing important things for a long time and has stopped needing to announce it. She went to the door, checked her watch, and stood at the entrance with the patience of someone who had arrived first on purpose. At 8 a.m., the clerk in the blue cardigan unlocked the front door from the inside. Eleanor went in. I sat across the street and breathed. At 8:09, my phone rang. "It's done," Eleanor's voice, steady as a level line. "The lis pendens is recorded and stamped. The trust documentation is on file. Anyone who pulls that title today, tomorrow, or 20 years from now will see it. Osei Family Trust. Sole beneficiary, Caleb Osei." A pause. "Whatever they bring in this morning will be rejected on chain of title grounds. The clerk has already flagged the parcel." I looked at the county building across the street. The morning light was coming sideways off the glass doors. "Thank you," I said, "for all of it." "Thank your mother. She did the architecture. I just filed the paperwork." I sat there another moment after she hung up. A woman walked past the front of the building with a stroller. A truck idled at the light. The ordinary world going about its ordinary business, completely unaware that something that had been 6 years in the making had just landed on a public record and could never be undone. I drove back to the house.
I sliced the cardamom cake, I plated 2 pieces, I made a fresh pot of coffee, and I waited. At 8:31, Dominic and Marcus came downstairs together. Dominic was wearing his business shirt, the navy one with the fine stripe, the one I had seen him wear to the bank and to meetings with contractors back when he was still pretending those meetings were about the store. Marcus was carrying the folder, the same kind of folder Priya had on her knee at the reception. They had graduated from notepad to folder. Progress. Priya was already in the kitchen, heels on, coffee poured. She looked at the cake on the counter, and then at me, and then back at the cake with the expression of someone who doesn't know what to do with an unexpected variable. "We'll head over after the meeting," Dominic said, picking up his keys. To Marcus, not to me. A glance in my direction. "We'll be back by lunch, Caleb. I'll have the paperwork ready for us to go through together." "All right," I said. He paused in the doorway, looked at me the way he had yesterday evening, that assessing look, the one that was calculating something behind a pleasant surface. Then he nodded, turned, left. Marcus followed without looking at me at all. I finished my coffee, I rinsed the cup, I set it in the drying rack the way my mother had always insisted, right side up so the water runs out clean. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and I waited some more.
At 9:22, my phone rang. Dominic's name on the screen. I let it ring once more. Then I answered. "What did you do?" Not a question. His voice was tight and stripped of the warmth, the way a wire sounds when you pull it past its tension, taut, vibrating, close to snapping. "I accepted what my mother left me," I said. "That's all." "You went behind our backs." The word "our" landed like a closed fist, with some attorney we've never heard of, with legal documents nobody knew about. "Eleanor Graves has been my mother's attorney for 6 years, Dominic. She drafted the trust the year I was 16. My mother chose not to discuss it. That was her choice to make." A sound on the other end. Traffic. He was in the parking lot of the county clerk's office, and I could hear the ambient noise of an ordinary morning going on around a man having a very bad one. "That building is a marital asset," his voice dropping lower now, controlled but only just. "She was my husband. I have rights here." "The building was transferred into an irrevocable trust before you were married. It was never a marital asset. It was never in her estate. I know you've spoken with your attorney this morning. He'll confirm the same thing Eleanor can tell you. The chain of title is clean. The trust is 6 years old. There is no legal path to what you were planning." Silence. And this is the part I want to be precise about, because I have thought about it many times since. I did not feel good. Not in the way I expected. I had spent the last 4 days bracing for this moment, the moment the clock ran out, the moment Dominic stood in a parking lot and discovered that the ground he had been standing on was not his. I had expected it to feel like something, like relief or release, or some clean, conclusive emotion with clear edges. It did not feel like that. It felt like standing in a room where something has been broken and the breaking is over, and now there is just the weight of all the pieces. "She never told me," he said, quieter now, the anger not gone but underneath something else, something that sounded underneath everything almost like grief. "No," I said. "She didn't." The line was quiet for a long moment. "I will contest this." But his voice didn't hold the shape of a threat anymore. It sounded like a man saying words because he needed to say something. "You can try," I said. "Eleanor has already noted that contesting an irrevocable trust established 6 years before the grantor's death, with full documentation of legal capacity, will cost more in legal fees than the asset is worth. That's not a warning, Dominic. It's just the math." Another silence. Longer. Then, "We'll talk when I get back." He hung up. I set my phone face up on the table and looked at it for a moment. Then I got up and cut myself another piece of cardamom cake. The call from Pinnacle Properties came at 11:14. A man named Carter Webb,
corporate voice, the kind of careful diction that means the person has been briefed and is now managing a situation. He introduced himself as the acquisitions lead for the Mercer Street development and said, without warmth, but also without hostility, that they were aware of a lis pendens filed on the property. "That's correct," I said. "Mr. Osei, we have a letter of intent executed with Dominic Osei for the acquisition of that parcel. He represented himself as having authority to deliver clear title. He doesn't have that authority. He never did. The property has been held in an irrevocable trust for 6 years. My name is on the trust. His is not." A pause. The sound of a keyboard. "Can you speak to the validity of the trust documentation?" "I can. So can my attorney, Eleanor Graves. I'll give you her number." Another pause. Longer. "Is there any circumstance," Carter Webb said, "under which the trust would consider an offer directly?" The question hung in the air between us. $890,000, the Mercer Street block, development money, a number with more zeros than my mother had ever seen in one place. I thought about the apron on the hook, the sticky note on the refrigerator, the recipe book open to page 47, the smell of cardamom in a kitchen at 5 in the morning. "The bakery is not for sale," I said. A beat. Understood. His voice cooled by 1 precise degree. "We'll be pursuing our remedies with Mr. Osei directly." I expected that. "Good luck to you." I gave him Eleanor's number. I set down the phone. 40 minutes later, Eleanor called to tell me what I'd already half calculated. The letter of intent Dominic had signed 4 months ago. 4 months ago, while my mother was still alive, while she was still getting up at 5 in the morning to shape bread in a kitchen he was already measuring for demolition, contained a penalty clause. Failure to deliver clear title within 60 days, $80,000 in damages, plus Pinnacle's legal costs. He had signed it assuming the bakery would be easy to extract from the estate. He had assumed no one had planned otherwise. He had assumed wrong.
Dominic came home at 2 in the afternoon. He moved through the front door the way I have only seen people move when they have had something taken from them that they thought was already theirs. Slowly, like each step requires a separate decision. He was still in the business shirt. The collar was open now. He sat down at the dining room table and, for a moment, he just looked at the wood grain. Priya and Marcus had come back before him. Priya was in the kitchen. Marcus had gone upstairs, and I had heard his door close with a firmness that stopped just short of a slam. I sat across from Dominic. I waited. "The attorney says the trust is airtight," he said finally. His voice was flat. The performance of warmth was entirely gone, and what was left underneath was something I hadn't seen from him before. Not anger, not calculation, just a man without his script. He says contesting it would take 2 years and cost more than the outcome would justify. That's consistent with what Eleanor told me. He looked up. For the first time in the 4 days I had been back in this house, he looked at me without an agenda running behind his eyes. Just looked. "I put 11 years into this family," he said. And here is the part that I did not expect, the part I have turned over many times since, in the bakery kitchen, on the drive to school, on the porch in the evenings, when the light comes off the lake and the day slows down to something manageable. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt something closer to sorrow. Because he wasn't lying. He had put 11 years in. He had loved my mother, I believe, genuinely, in the ways he was capable of. And somewhere along the way, the love had gotten tangled up with the asset, and he had stopped being able to tell them apart. That is not my fault, but it is a tragedy, and I have learned not to call tragedies victories just because they resolve in your favor. "I know you did," I said, "and she knew it too. She loved you, Dominic. She chose you. That part was real." I paused.
But she built that bakery 30 years before she met you. She built it for me. She knew what she wanted, and she made sure of it, legally, quietly, years before either of us knew we'd need to have this conversation. He stared at the table. She was smarter than all of us, he said. Yes, I said. She was. We sat there for a while in the quiet. Not a comfortable quiet, but an honest one. The kind where everything that needs to be said has been said, and what's left is just the space where things used to be. Then I stood up, and I did the thing my mother would have done. There's cardamom cake in the kitchen. She'd want it eaten. Priya found me at the bakery 3 days later. She came in through the front door at 7:30 in the morning before the first customers, when the smell of the day's first bake was still settling into the room. I was behind the counter. Miss Cora was in the kitchen. Priya looked different without the notepad. Smaller, somehow. More like a person and less like a position. She sat at the corner table, the one my mother kept for people who needed somewhere to sit. I want to say something, she said. Okay. She looked at the table for a moment, then at me. I didn't know about the trust. I want you to believe that, even if you don't have to. I studied her. I thought she was probably telling the truth. I thought she had probably known enough to be part of the planning without knowing the specific details, and I thought the distinction mattered to her more than it did to me, but I also thought that was human, and I was trying, in the aftermath of all of it, to stay human myself. I believe you, I said. She nodded. What my dad did, the letter of intent, before she was even gone, she stopped, pressed her lips together. I didn't know about that either. I want you to know that I didn't know about that. Okay. I'm sorry, Caleb. I looked at her for a moment, at this woman I had grown up alongside without ever quite growing up with, who had sat in my mother's house with a notepad at a funeral reception, and who I would probably never fully trust, and who nonetheless was sitting across from me at my mother's corner table, telling me she was sorry. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. Not entirely, but enough. Miss Cora found me in the kitchen later that morning, after the first rush had settled and the room had gone quiet again. She handed me a coffee, and we stood side by side at the counter the way we had on the morning after the funeral. You doing all right? She asked. Getting there. She sipped her coffee, looked out at the front of the shop, the morning light coming through the second window my mother had added 6 years ago so the light could get in properly. You know what she told me? Miss Cora said. The last time I asked her why she'd never told your stepfather about the trust, I looked at her. She said, Cora, some things you don't announce. You build them quiet, and you let them speak when the time comes. She paused. Then she went back to her dough like it was the simplest thing she'd ever said. I looked at the counter. The same counter my mother had worked every morning for 40 years. She was right, I said. She usually was, said Miss Cora. I found the letter on a Tuesday evening in the second week of November. I had been staying at the bakery full-time by then, moved my things from the house, enrolled at the community college program Eleanor had mentioned was just 20 minutes from Mercer Street, updated my mailing address for the first time to something that felt, when I wrote it out, like an arrival rather than a temporary stop. I had been going through the office drawers methodically, the way my mother did everything, slow, complete, nothing skipped. In the bottom drawer of the old oak desk, beneath a stack of invoices and a rubber-banded collection of birthday cards I had sent her, every one of them, every single year, I found an envelope. My name on the front, her handwriting. Eleanor had told me it would be there. She had been holding the knowledge of it in reserve, waiting until the legal dust had settled. There's a letter, she said. She wanted you to have it after. She said you'd know when after felt right. I sat down in my mother's chair, at my mother's desk, and I opened it. 1 page, blue ink, her handwriting full and assured at the top the way it always was when she was writing something she'd thought about carefully, loosening slightly toward the bottom the way it did when she was tired or emotional or both. She told me she was sorry that a letter was necessary, that she wished she could have just handed me the keys one afternoon, told me over coffee, made it simple. She said she knew it hadn't been simple and she was sorry for the parts of it that hurt, and she was not sorry, not for one clause, not for one line, for the choice she had made to protect me. She told me she had known when she met Dominic that she was choosing a man with good intentions and incomplete self-knowledge. She said she had loved him for his intentions and planned around his limitations, and she hoped I understood that as a form of wisdom rather than coldness. She said love, in her experience, was not blind. Love was clear-eyed and planning ahead, and making sure the people you loved had ground to stand on when the ground shifted. She said, I built the bakery before I knew what it would become, the same way I had you before I knew who you would become. I have been proud of both, every single day. She said, you never needed anyone's permission to take up space in your own story. I know it felt that way sometimes. I should have said it louder. Consider this me saying it as loud as I can. The last paragraph was shorter, the handwriting looser. I think she wrote it late, or tired, or maybe both. The cardamom cake recipe is on page 47. The secret ingredient isn't the cardamom. Everyone knows about the cardamom. The secret is the butter. You wait until it's just past golden, just before it turns, and you pull it. That half second of patience is what makes it. You always had that half second in you, Caleb. That's why I knew you'd be okay. Take care of it. It took care of you first. All my love, always, M.
I folded the letter. I held it in both hands for a while. Outside, Mercer Street was settling into evening. The last of the day's customers had gone. The lights in the front of the shop were warm and low, the way my mother kept them. Through the window, I could see the corner of the street where I had stood as a kid, waiting for her to flip the sign from open to closed so we could walk home together. I thought about what she said, about the butter, about patience, about the half second that most people miss because they are already moving on to the next thing before this thing is finished. My mother spent 6 years being patient, 6 years of building something in silence, waiting for a moment she would not live to see, trusting that the person she was building it for would know what to do when the time came. And I thought about what she left behind. Not just the legal documents, not just the building or the equipment or the savings account or the trust. What she left behind was a way of understanding love, not as something said, not as something performed for an audience, not as something conditional on what you could offer in return, but as something structural, something that holds, something you pour into the foundation before anyone is watching and walk away from and let set and trust. That was my mother. She loved me architecturally. I am standing in this kitchen right now on a morning in early December with flour on my hands and the day's first bake in the oven, and I want to tell you something before I let this story go. I did not win. I want to be precise about that. There is nothing to win when the people who hurt you are people who are supposed to be in your corner. You do not collect a trophy for surviving something that should not have happened. You do not come out the other side of that kind of quiet betrayal feeling victorious. You come out of it feeling tired and changed, and, if you are lucky, held up by something solid underneath you. I am lucky. My mother made sure of that. Dominic did not contest the trust. The legal fees, as Eleanor had predicted, would have buried him before the case found its footing. He is selling the house, not the bakery, to settle what he owes Pinnacle in damages. Last I heard, he's staying with his brother 2 towns over. We have not spoken since the afternoon at the dining room table. I do not know yet if we will. I am leaving that door neither open nor closed. I am leaving it the way my mother left things she hadn't decided about yet, on the counter, in the light, where I can see it clearly and choose when I am ready. Priya called once, 2 weeks after. A short call, careful. She asked if I was doing okay. I said I was. She said she was glad. We hung up, and I stood in the kitchen for a while thinking about the particular loneliness of almost family, of the people you grew up adjacent to without ever quite growing up with.
I think I will think about that for a long time. Miss Cora is here every morning at 6:45. She has not missed a single one. The bakery is doing what it has always done, feeding people, giving teenagers their first jobs, running a tab for the families who are short this month. My mother's chalkboard handwriting is still on the board in the back kitchen. I haven't erased it. I don't think I will for a while. I have started writing the new specials on the board out front in my own hand, and every morning I look at the two boards and think, continuation. That is what this is. I am enrolled in environmental science. I drive 20 minutes each way, windows down most mornings because the air here is something Atlanta does not have. I am learning the land around this place, the watershed, the soil composition, the way the tree lines have shifted over 40 years of development pressure. I am thinking about what it means to steward a piece of ground, to know it well enough to protect it. My mother taught me that. She just used dough instead of soil. Before I go, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Not the answer that sounds right, but the actual answer. If someone left you something the way my mother left me this, built into the foundation years before you knew you needed it, quiet, unmovable, full of the kind of love that plans ahead, what would you do with it? Would you hold it? Would you build on it? Would you know when the moment came what it was worth? And the other side of it, have you ever watched someone you trusted start counting something in a room they shouldn't have been in? Have you ever felt the ground shift under a conversation and known, not suspected, known that the person across from you had already made a decision they hadn't told you about yet? Tell me in the comments your real answer, not the diplomatic one, not the one that makes you look good, the true one. Because stories like this one don't live in the telling, they live in the recognition. They live in the moment you read something and think, that happened to me. I know that room. I know that silence. If you know that silence, tell me about it below. I read every single one. And if this story held you, if it kept you here all the way to this last line, then you know what to do. Hit the like button. Not for me, for every person who has ever had to protect something quietly, who has ever had to be patient when every part of them wanted to speak, who has ever been loved in a way they didn't fully understand until they needed it. This story is for them, and so is that like button. The oven timer is going off. The butter, when I pull it, will be just past golden, just at the line, 1/2 second of attention between perfect and lost. My mother taught thee to pull it there. I always do.